Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Awakened Mother Show. I'm Reverend Wendy Silvers, and you have arrived at a really safe, loving space. And this show brings to you mothers, fathers, people that are on the forefront of awakening consciousness as it pertains to the path of parenting and as it pertains to the path of living. This show does not dispense medical advice, and we will have people that are going to share all different perspectives on being well and wellness. And so you, as a conscious creator, have the opportunity to take in this information, assimilate it, and absorb what you wish to, and discard what you don't. And today I'm really delighted to share with you someone that I have known for quite a number of years. Our paths have crossed through different communities, and you will love her. Let me tell you a little bit about Heather Grace Powers. She is a devoted wife, mother, and grandmother, and lover of life. She is a trauma-informed life recovery and relationship coach and co-founder of the Powers of Love with her husband, Jason. Together, they lovingly serve as community leaders. She's a workshop creator and group facilitator supporting spiritual, mental, and emotional healing. They also specialize in holistic addiction recovery. Heather is an award-winning singer-songwriter, and her music has often been called medicine for the soul, which she incorporates through much of her work. Her training crosses the span of psycho-spiritual education and sacred teachings, traditions, and philosophy from across the East and West. Heather's voice and music have been featured in movies, radio, and television. She is the creator of Sing Your Soul Awake, a multi-sensory course designed to help clients heal and integrate the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of life and relationship through the power of the voice and restore connection, balance, and joy. So please help me welcome to the stage Heather Grace Powers. And the crowd goes wild.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
So good. Sometimes when you hear your own bio, it's like to experience the growth and the seasons, and it's always fun to hear it on this end, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah,
so
totally.
wow, I've done all that, and
Right.
right. I often say, in spite of everything that I have accomplished, or the letters after my name, or the projects, what I cherish the most is mother.
Yes, it's why you got to start with it, right?
Yeah.
It's so at the core of everything, both in our lives and I think spiritually,
Mhm.
the archetype of the Divine Mother is such a big influence in our healing, each of us personally. So
Absolutely. I've heard myself. It's interesting because since the Million Mamas movement came into being, I I I've heard myself say the influence of the mother is so needed in
mm,
our world because our world is so out of balance. And I think
mhm.
about when I've said that, I think, well, not every mother is evolved, but I'm talking about that higher
Yes,
version, vision of the
yes.
archetypal, like you said, the divine mother
Mhm.
who holds her children with fierce compassion.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's I think a lot of us, growing up in terms of being in a more male centric kind of especially where spiritual traditions are concerned.
Mhm.
For me, it was three generations of pastors, and that's where I grew up with. So I was very steeped in a very male centric
Mhm.
spiritual life. And mothers really they were the caretakers, but also mostly stayed home. And there was just a much different worldview on all of that, and they weren't out in the world as much in terms of that fierce compassion, because it was almost like a protective barrier from women being out in the world to understand how to be a fierce protector, if that makes sense. And
Yes.
I see, I'm sure you're the same. There's an interesting rising of the feminine, I think both as there's a healed feminine rising, but there's also a very retaliatory feminine energy that's rising in woundedness.
Mhm. Yes.
And that deep healing as the mother energy inside of us that is able to love all of it and also have really healthy boundaries at the same time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. It's similar to, I remember someone once saying the collapsed feminine. And I
Yes.
think of, and in our world, especially with social media, there's so many different um, jargon, the toxic masculine, the conscious
Mhm.
and the internalized, and I do feel like I'm seeing the internalized collapsed feminine. That is,
Mhm.
I think that has mistaken this Kali energy, this energy of going force
Yeah.
as a fierce force for good, um,
Yes.
but is really perpetuating
Mhm.
the same toxic pattern, but spinning it so that it sounds good, or it gets people stirred up, and it's
Yeah.
an interesting perspective to be holding the space,
Mhm.
and then to hear like the accused, oh, the silent, like it's a
Yeah.
very different vibration to hold that space,
Mhm.
because everything else is opinion.
It's so true. It's so true. There's so many opportunities to have an opinion, and I suppose, the gift of us doing, regular, daily, hourly inner work to really become aware of where our thoughts are coming from and what they're motivated by. And, I'm sure we'll talk about with, the traumas that we still have that play out in our unconscious or our
Mhm.
subconscious that inform, where we are. And it's look around and you realize that um, where we are a lot of inner little children in grown up bodies, with a lot of interesting maladaptations at play. And it feels like the quieter and simpler we get, the clearer it is to be able to assert boundaries that are generated from love, not only for ourselves, but for the well-being of the people around us as well.
Mhm.
Um, but it takes a lot of stillness to be able to do that. I don't know about you, but I feel more and more that I just my alone time and having and sometimes that's hard to get.
It is.
Sometimes it's hard to get, and sometimes when you have that time, the distractions, the tyranny of the urgent comes up
The
so
tyranny.
quickly, right? Pulls you right back into your own internal chaos before you know it. And
Mhm.
so I just so appreciate and thank you for having me to be, just a part of this conversation with you and what you are doing, the space that you hold in so many arenas. I know you wear a lot of hats, and
Mhm.
um, just the love with which you always convey clearly
Mhm.
and the things that you stand for passionately really are an inspiration. So
That's
thank
so,
you.
thank you. That's so generous of you. One, I, it's so wonderful also to have this conversation with you, because we've connected throughout the years in
Yeah.
various paths, and there's things that you're doing, that you're speaking about, that it's like, okay, like where do I
Yeah.
start, right? Like, now
Yeah.
let's talk about women particularly. It happens with men
Mhm.
because they want to please us,
Mhm.
or they want to
Mhm.
please each other.
Mhm.
Boundaries are so important. And I
Mhm.
can remember, I know that you and Jason work in the recovery field,
Mhm.
and I've been in the recovery movement for 37, almost 37 years this month. And
Incredible.
and thank you. And one of the things I remember someone saying to me when I first entered was about boundaries, that when you set boundaries,
Mhm.
the people you're setting the boundaries with will probably not like it. It really will reveal where they are in
Yes.
their evolution and their maturity. Some
It's
will, and it's very fascinating to me because boundaries has been something I have been actively building. And I
mhm,
just had an experience recently with setting a boundary, and it was just the most shocking, response or
mhm,
reaction that I experienced, which bore, borne out, bore out that factor.
mm.
Um, but tell me, what is your experience with this setting boundaries? And I want to say one thing as a parent and as a
Mm.
parent educator, I have learned, and what I teach people is to say, setting limits, like my limit is.
Yes, I like that.
It feels more like,
Yes,
it's because when I first
I like
started setting boundaries,
that.
it was,
Yeah, totally. It comes across and feels punitive.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm gonna take that. Thank you. I
Okay.
really,
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate that. That resonates a lot. And, the way that I've described it in the past, um, the difference between boundaries and walls. Erecting walls seems to come out of more of our woundedness and a need to keep people out. To me, the way that I understand boundaries are our limits, our preferences, what feels right and aligned and true for us, that is also respectful of the other person.
Hmm.
So finding that balance sometimes is really a challenge because I know for me, I grew up with very few boundaries
Mm,
and, a life of looking back in hindsight now that I'm, getting more and more comfortable with voicing those boundaries. I look back and go, holy moly. I mean, my life was just like, it was wide open and also just encroaching everywhere on it didn't have any. And
yeah.
I didn't, there was a lot of religious structure, but the
Mm.
boundaries that seemed like we maybe had, culturally speaking, felt punitive. There was no reason why they existed. Like it was just like, don't, as in a funny example, one of the things that we grew up with, my parents said, hearts and lips aren't toys. It was like, I was more fearful of my parents finding out that I was being, sexually active so I got married. Like I was
Wow.
in so
How
much
old?
fear from that. 19.
Wow.
Yeah. And in our culture, that was very common. That was just common. But the idea of having sex before marriage was it was such a huge deal that was more fearful than making a choice. Because we didn't understand, it's kind of interesting. The whole purity movement, I think there is the core of what that means, there's some total value to it because
Mhm.
obviously the more we give that energy away to people that we're now enmeshed and entangled with in a very quantum kind of a way,
Mhm.
there's real value to that. And us
Mhm.
understanding and guarding our own sacredness is very important. But so maybe those are, the rules and boundaries are very different as well. And it's been scary to learn along the way to really set clear healthy boundaries because I think like you said before, a lot of times when you do, the relationships that you currently have don't know how to behave any longer. It's like there's something amiss until you figure out, how do we have this relationship, with these boundaries so that we can actually love each other better. And some
Right.
right? Some people, where there's more of my choice rather than you taking from me unconsciously or whatever.
I
So
love
it's
it.
really, as women, I think it's, coming into, the being okay using our throat chakra express, because when we don't, our will gets shut down, our passion gets shut down, our emotions shut down. And having experienced a lot of that as well, I just realized a lot of times it's being brave to say what you are afraid to say, and whatever the consequences are really are about the other person doesn't make it easier necessarily,
Mm-mm, mm-mm.
but it
No.
definitely shows you the truth of what you're
Hmm.
dealing with. And
It's
sometimes it's a painful truth to receive or
for
accept.
sure.
Yeah.
I, as you're talking, it's making me think about one of the things that I did before. I had already been doing counseling work, but before I had even really known about it, when I became a mom, I
Mm.
would not let anybody touch my daughter without
Mm.
checking in with her. I mean, literally, like when she was in the sling in my arms, and people would go, I would say, ask her, and they would look at. Some people were like, "That is so beautiful, wow," and then others would be like, uh, "What?"
That's
What you're asking me to do what?
Mhm.
And I remember at Agape, there was this woman, beautiful soul, who passed on 20 years ago, who observed me, and she taught this class called Impact. And she came up to me and she said, "Wow, what you're doing is so incredible. Don't stop."
Wow.
Because it was just very organic to me that
Yeah.
my baby has rights. Like it's
Yeah.
her space. And
Yeah.
so, that was very revealing to see how people reacted to it,
Oh my word, totally.
right?
You
Like,
know,
oh, what do you mean? That baby's amorphous. It doesn't have a boundary. And
right.
it made me think, like, when I was a kid, I didn't know what bound. I remember when
Yeah.
somebody, it was probably in the 80s, somebody said to me about boundaries, and I thought, huh?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Wait, I end and you begin? Like we're not fused?
Right.
It's okay for me to say no or not? Mm-mm, I don't. That doesn't work for me.
Right?
Wow.
We just don't get taught that, especially as little girls, I think. I think it also goes along with just even the emotion of anger, like a healthy anger,
Yes.
not being able to express when something does cross our boundary and we express it, that often those emotions are shut down. They're not acceptable. They're certainly not, it's like there's no room for the expression of it because it makes the parents uncomfortable, or they don't know how to deal with what's coming out.
Right.
And wow, that is so powerful that you did that, because can you imagine a world where little ones grow up knowing that that's just natural, that they have
Yeah.
boundaries?
It would be beautiful. I mean,
Incredible.
it would be beautiful. I work with people that have experienced great trauma and,
Mm.
boundaries being crossed. I think we all, to greater or lesser degrees, just
Yes.
like you were talking about your childhood and my childhood and young adulthood and all that. And, it's very interesting. I don't know why this is coming into my awareness, but I think about, like, if we're going to widen the lens and think about public figures, I think about Kanye and his new wife, Bianca. And I think, oh, I would love to unpack that. I would love
Yes.
to support her because
Yes.
my heart says
Mm.
there's something going on there that
Mm.
she is allowing herself,
Totally. Oh, that got
right?
me a lump in my throat every time I see pictures of them and the outfits that it's there. I mean, there's a whole culture of that we've just somehow either not known what it looks like, or just turned a blind eye because we haven't known exactly what to deal with it. I think, along those lines, I remember the moment it occurred to me that when it comes to that kind of entrapment,
Mm,
um, and how many lives and homes of people that you would never guess
right.
you would never guess that are when you talk about, pornography and the slippery slope that goes into an addiction and all these things when we're in these mental states when there is a spiritual battle going on and
Mhm.
the attachments that come in when we are not conscious and fully embodied in ourselves,
Mhm.
um, that I think the fear of exposing what is really at the core of a lot of what is happening, it would touch way more homes, way more families than we could even.
So, it's interesting you bring this up, and this we can lead into the recovery work that you and Jason are doing. But I think about two things. I think about the when you oppress and suppress
Yes.
natural desires and instincts and make them wrong,
Yes.
it's like a wound that festers and
Yeah.
it or when you, like you said, so I love that you brought up anger in women, because that's a whole nother, like we could
Yeah.
have a whole conversation about that,
Yes.
because that anger isn't allowed to come out, and then it's expressed as rage, or sexual desire doesn't come out, and then it comes out as distortion and pornography and and power over
Mhm.
behaviors, and no boundaries, and all of the stuff that we see in the bigger picture. But you're right, it happens in so many homes. And then the child trafficking, I mean, we could go, you know
Yes.
and I think if we go to the root,
Mhm.
we are spiritual beings having a human life incarnation experience,
Yes.
whatever language you want to call it.
Yeah.
We're having it through the human experience, and we have the opportunity to evolve
Yeah.
consciously and to mature spiritually. But
Mhm.
if we, you, me, whomever is listening to this, doesn't take that opportunity, then there's all of that oppression and suppression, and it has to come out.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh. It's it e I think also the way that the energy is at this point because we things are moving so quickly now and so much is being fed so quickly by way of programming and
Mhm.
enculturing people that not dealing with these things, it's like the pain is getting worse and worse if you're not looking at the
I
truth,
agree. I
right?
so agree.
And
Yes.
you can see even in people that I mean, I can think of a couple of friends that we have that are continuing to they're incredible people, but they're continuing to live a lifestyle of, um, I would say, escape, let's call it that. Escape
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
line blurring and all of those things, and we all have different ways that maybe, preferable escapes that we have adapted, especially social media is one of the biggest ones. I would say
Yeah.
spirituality can be one of the biggest escapes. I have another friend who I can see the splinter in her mind. She's lost touch with reality through spirituality, and there's no embodiment
Mhm.
going on. So wherever our breaks are in our psyche right now, it feels as though they are being revealed at a much heightened um,
Mhm.
level,
Mhm.
and people are either like, "I have to deal with this," or they don't even know how or who, or there's so much shame they don't know where to go.
Right.
Or you got to deal with it and just get really, really honest. And as you
Mm.
know, it's like we've been doing this work for a long time internally, and it's not easy.
Mm-mm.
It's not easy, and it takes a village. It takes people who have been there with a little bit of the light ahead saying, "Hey, you're not gonna die."
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because it can feel like that. It certainly can feel like that, especially when our collective reflection, in what's happening in the world outside of us is getting so and just so poignantly clear of what's really happening inside of us.
It's that. Oh, that's so well said.
Oh,
I remember years ago, somebody told me they were at a party and they talked to this kind of spiritual psychologist, and he said to them, if you don't deal with the psyche will deal with you.
Yes, boy, that is the truth.
Right? So
Yeah.
so we can be, I remember also Michael Beckwith saying this so many years ago about you can be so spiritual that you're no earthly good, or so earthy that you're no
Yes.
spiritual, not that you're no spiritual good, but that it's that idea that it really is about the integration.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
I mean, that's the beauty for me. That's the beauty of what spirituality offers, like conscious spirituality, and which sounds like an oxymoron, but what I'm
Yeah,
saying,
totally.
because people have blind spots. I know I went through a leadership program not long ago, and I remember thinking, well, I've dealt with so much. I mean, truly, I have, and I'm
Right?
not done because I'm still in this earth suit. So I understand that. And then I went through this leadership program, and it really illuminated places and beliefs that I didn't think I had, that I
Mm,
wasn't holding on to
yeah.
um, consciously. So when you do this work, you have an opportunity to unpack the blind spots.
Yes, it's so true. And it never ends, right?
Mm-mm,
I mean,
mm-mm.
I love that you and all the years that you've been working on this continue to recognize, like, I need to keep looking deeper because there's just so if we're a collection of fractals upon fractals upon fractals.
Yes,
These,
yes.
these patterns, I think the patterns that we are here to purify, it's a never-ending job, and I feel like just when we kind of feel like we get some mastery over some certain area, it's almost like there's a brief respite, and then it's like you go around another spiral,
Yes.
and it's a new level, new devil, but it's the same patterns, it's the same, you have more territory that it affects, or your impact is greater, but the same patterns will show up. And there's grace in that because I think
Mhm,
the more you stay with it, the more you're sensitive to where your own
mhm.
patterns may play out, particularly in relationship, because as you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
like, that's a 24/7 mirror, and it doesn't it's grace, but it's also unforgiving in that it's always present. And
Absolutely.
I just the idea of more and more collaboration in our healing process. I
Mhm,
love the program, all of it, all of its many forms because of that,
mhm.
that we all have addictions, we all have trauma, we're all in this, like you said, we are traumatized just being birthed into this world.
Well, you know what I think about? There was a conversation, I think about this. When I was pregnant and I didn't do the test to see what the sex of my baby was, um, the there was 50-50 chance it would be female, and 50 chance it could be
Yeah.
male. And our pediatrician, very famous pediatrician, Dr. Paul Fleiss,
Mm,
he was very pro leaving a male child intact and not doing a circumcision.
mm,
And when I did my due diligence, I was interviewing pediatricians because there were certain things that were really important to me, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to have a hassle with the pediatrician when I would be there with my baby. Um, and so he sent me some video that I could not watch. I think I started it, and my husband and I were in really serious dialogue about circumcision,
yeah. Mm,
because the studies show that that baby's brain is changed
yes.
from that procedure. They don't anesthetize the
Right.
baby. I
Right.
mean, and they're doing a surgical procedure.
Just the thought of that, how we've gotten to that point where it's just accepted.
Well, but it's been tradition. It's been, I mean, it was something that, way, way back in
Yes,
Moses's time. It was like that's what,
yes.
right? And I think, so I think about when we talk about trauma and generational trauma, let's talk about what's happened. I mean, that's such a huge trauma for men.
Oh my
But
God.
then there's the social mores about, well, if you don't circumcise, you're going to look differently, you're going to be unclean, like all these things that go along with that. So, so to your
Mhm.
point,
Mm,
what you
mm.
were saying about we're all the trauma, that's like a baseline
Huge.
for men that
Yeah.
it's maybe not conscious. And some people will be like, oh, come on. You know how people will say that? Like, oh,
Mhm.
don't,
Babies don't know.
right. Don't
Yeah.
look back. Don't look for things to be. I'm like, this is like studies. Like they've got studies.
Mhm.
The stats are there.
Mhm.
So when you talk about, I love that you and Jason are doing that, the life recovery, and that you're doing trauma informed life recovery, and
Mm.
you went through an extraordinary experience with Jason.
Yes. Yes.
So we speak about both.
Yeah. So back in 21, it was in November, we were both sick, and it was we tested positive. I tested positive first, and whatever your opinions are and all of that
Yeah,
is besides the point. But
it was a thing. There
it
definitely
was a
was a
thing at
thing.
that point. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we both definitely had something, right? And it was clear after about 10 days, we were both kind of in this space, and I was getting over it and he was not getting over it.
Mm.
And now, mind you, we had both just gone together through a very intensive 11-week course on dealing with your shadows.
Ah, that's great.
Yeah. I mean, it was uncovering a lot of really, honest, truthful things. And also at that point, the state of the world was there was a lot of things that we know now that we kind of knew, but we didn't have the proof of and all of that stuff. So there was definitely some fear underneath,
Mm-hmm.
what was going on and how quickly is this whole thing going to fall apart. I mean, a lot of what ifs for sure.
Yeah.
And so, with all of that and the circumstances that surrounded it, um, each day it was like Jason was getting more and more ill,
Mm-hmm.
and we tried, every kind of remedy that any of our, natural path friends, anything that was floating out around, protocols, whatever,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and nothing was helping. And at one point, we took him to the emergency room. Long story short, they sent us home with some antibiotics, did nothing. Took him back 2 days later. They said he had a spot of pneumonia in one lung, but 2 days later, we took him back, and he had both of his lungs were totally filled, so he had pneumonia. And it was it was a really interesting, it felt like we both went into no time and no space. And sometimes how the Holy Spirit, like, has you so enveloped, and for him, he was just losing life force by the day. It was like it was all he could do to kind of stay alive, really.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, as I was getting better and taking care, I could feel I was having my own mystical experience on the other side of that, feeling, an empowerment that was real and present, and also recognizing. So I took him to the hospital. They whisked him away. And at that point, they weren't letting anybody in. It was like we couldn't even say goodbye. Um, and my awakening many years ago began with both of my parents dying in the same year, my parents and my grandmother. And I was facing, am I going to lose my husband? Just, and there was like no connection. It felt like there was this really weird severing. And I, at one hand, knew that he was in the safest place, and also knew that, we had the remdesivir thing going, and I had to call. And there was just this like vigilance of he was just suspended and having to completely trust the process. And for him, that was a real rebirth and reset for him, because he went through
Mm.
10 days in that cocoon of really getting to face himself in a way very tangibly without anybody else around, and his own process. And
Mm.
I was here at our home having to deal with everything, but also it was just, talk about that union, that we overlap, but we don't encroach upon each other's circles. It was the perfect out picturing of and the whole, so much of this course had been about individuating.
Wow.
Right. And yeah, it was really incredible. I mean, it was one of those experiences for both of us. He came out having shed so much.
I
I
bet.
Yeah, I shed so much through the process of having to step up and become a warrior in a different kind of a way than I had experienced.
I bet.
And it brought us both, I think, back together in also highlighting things that we needed to work on that we didn't see before, brought
Wow.
us to a new
Like
level.
what? If you're
Communi
comfortable sharing.
Yeah, absolutely, communication stuff. Um, some dynamics that we had in our relationship with pornography being an issue, and he's very open about that. You ought to have him as well, to
Okay.
him, because that's a really big piece. The codependence and our coping strategies are a lot of what we love to share from our own journey, because we've definitely been in the trenches with all of that, and how we dealt with our own childhood trauma, and how we individually numb our pain.
Right.
So there was a lot of that to deal with, and what was underneath all of it, though, was the reality that love sustained us throughout the process, and our individualized choice to stay in the fire together and not give up, and
Wow.
know that we're going to the next level of our growth.
Mm.
um, because it's, as each new level takes a lot of bravery, because sometimes it's like, oh man,
I'm out.
we're not done yet. Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
out. I'm done. Forget this.
yeah,
Done.
totally. And Marion Woodman, an incredible,
Yes. She's
yes,
wonderful.
right. I remember her talking about a series this was her at 80 years old, talking about the series of divorces that she said, my husband and I have had 8 divorces in our marriage. And with
Wow.
each divorce, we had to welcome new versions of ourselves. And with that came a whole nother host of tests, and that breaking down of where the ego kind of set in its ways, and the ways that it thinks it's right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that
Wow.
was one of our divorces, and coming back together, um, for the new level.
That's
And so it
beautiful.
continues, but I'll tell you, I just wanna say this publicly, like, the outpouring of grace financially, I mean, the financial hardship that it was, we felt so incredibly supported, and it was very humbling to receive just the prayer, knowing and feeling being prayed for, and, the monetary gifts, and all of it was just, it's an evidence of that us collectively being, for lack of a better term, the body of Christ in action for real.
Mm.
When one part of the body is not functional, the other parts rally and compensate too. So
Wow, that's beautiful.
thank you
And
for
yeah, well, I remember I was watching and praying, while
thank
that you were
you.
going through that, and I feel like it's so moving to hear about how you both stayed the course,
Mm,
and that you were both willing to, you were almost forced. It's so interesting.
totally.
You were forced, and sometimes I really believe that our souls, that's part of the soul magic that happens.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about woo woo or incantations or
Yes,
but I think
absolutely.
about it's the mystical aspect of your soul,
Yeah.
that when you say yes to growth and unfoldment, when you are committed, when you make that commitment with your partner and with yourself and the silent partner, or
Yep.
God of your understanding,
Yes.
you have this opportunity, and that there will be circumstances that look like, way, I would never choose this in a million years. I would never. Why? And yet, the harvest
Yes.
that you reaped
Yeah.
from this experience, and thankfully,
Mhm.
he's very healthy and well
He's
through
so
this.
healthy and well. He's an amazing, amazing man, and I'm so grateful for his life and the work that he does with men as a result of, the work that he is doing with men was born out of that season, I think. And the fruit that's coming from
Mhm,
that, the work that I have done with women. I think that individuation and also recognizing the strength of both of us,
mhm,
but then the together work makes more sense, right? When
right.
there's the strength of the two, and to see that continue to unfold even in our relationship work, how
Mhm,
we're never given more than we're ready to really handle the capacity for, unless
mhm,
we force our way into things that
right.
will probably crumble anyways.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
learning to trust, like just exactly what you said, that the divinity within us
Mhm.
does not make mistakes. I think that the more we learn to truly trust that and become sensitive to the whispering of the spirit inside of us and then take action accordingly, I think that's our work to do, is because sometimes we miss it. Sometimes we resist what it's asking us to do.
Right.
Sometimes we're either rebellious or fearful, which makes perfect sense when we've got
Yeah.
trauma that we're still trying to heal. But life really is unfolding for us. That's not just a spiritual axiom, it's the truth. And yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is, when I hear you talk about that, what I think about is the embodiment.
Yes.
Because you can read a lot of books, you can go to a lot of workshops, a lot of seminars, you can engage. I mean, I really acknowledge you and Jason for going through this together, because so many times couples, one is really more interested, and then they have to adapt to the other couple who doesn't really want to do it, and
Yep.
it can feel like a shrinking, when the
Yeah.
desire is for expansion,
Yeah.
and all that kind of. I'm sure in your work with couples, that's not an uncommon pattern, uh,
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
And
It's more normal than not, really.
yeah, isn't it fascinating? So
Yeah.
fascinating. But we
Really.
have this opportunity to know that nothing is happening um, against us, right?
Yeah.
I always think of that Einstein quote, that you can, and I'm paraphrasing because it's not in
Yeah.
front of me or anything, but he said there are two ways to look at life: as though everything is a miracle or nothing is a miracle.
That's right.
And it is hard when people go through horrific trauma, that they do need to process, like that's the opportunity to get to the other side.
Yes.
You can't bypass it.
Mm-mm.
You can't
Mm-mm.
spiritualize. You must have your feelings and move through it, so that you can recognize, not only you can recognize God in all of it, you can recognize the gifts that were there
Yes.
along with that stuff. When you talked about at the top of our conversation, when you talked about trauma, and the fact that yes, you can. I did a summit called Evolve Beyond Trauma, Evolve and Thrive,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Because you can evolve and thrive beyond trauma. It doesn't mean the memory goes away. It means
Right.
that living in that traumatic vibration
Yes.
goes away. And
Yes.
that takes commitment. It takes showing up, the vulnerability, the humility, the willingness to
Yes.
have a good life.
It's so true. So beautifully said. It is willingness because, and I think that's really where, I love where you're coming from. I feel like our hearts are so resonant. Just the embodiment piece and the integration piece is really sometimes just as simple as looking at where our pride and arrogance is,
Mhm.
in the resistance of not wanting to deal with those parts of ourselves that we've orphaned and the problems that they are causing in our life now, which is really what
Yeah.
I love how, the different forms of the program all deal with the same thing. It's like, okay, I'm
Mhm.
in this place. It doesn't discount what has happened to me, but I can either stay in a state of self pity and continue to medicate however I choose, and now continue to create from that space and often become the very thing that I've been running from in my own relationships.
Yes.
Right? We just keep
Yes.
eating those cycles, and when we're not conscious of that, and the the simplicity of coming and facing ourselves, getting clean with another person, you know? Don't do it alone, and don't be afraid to find somebody that you can be absolutely honest with, because the
Yeah.
truth will set you free.
Yeah. It's so interesting you're saying that because I think about this journey of in our work, you and Jason are coaching people.
Mhm.
I've, I've been coaching spiritual life coaching people for so long,
Yeah.
but I don't stop doing my work
No.
and
No.
I don't do it alone.
Mhm.
Do you know? And I was at this event recently and they showed this video. It was so moving and it like broke open my heart. But they showed the video about Kobe and his video was called Hello Basketball.
Mm.
It's so beautiful, but so, to know that he and his daughter and those other people on the plane are no longer in this realm. But what was so beautifully articulated was that even Kobe, who was phenomenally gifted,
Yeah.
he always had a coach.
Mhm.
Barbara Streisand, one of the
Yep.
greatest voices in our time, always has a coach.
Yes.
Pavarotti, like all these great masters
Yep.
in their field,
Yeah.
the ones that don't think, oh, I'm good, I don't need anybody. They always have somebody to help them stay lifted, to stay gifted, to keep being
So true.
masterful,
So true. It's
right?
so true.
So,
Yeah, it I feel like because sometimes we go in and out of season, so it's
mhm,
not just like when we grow, it doesn't necessarily mean that we just stay in that season of,
right.
now this is who I am, and it's like sometimes we go back through a dark night of the soul that brings us back into the cave. And I don't think in anything we can't rest on our laurels. There's,
I Well, that's why I love that you're saying that because that's why it's called spiritual practice.
yes.
It's not called spiritual destination
Right. Totally. Totally.
because I can meditate. In full transparency, if I do not stay on my meditation practice,
Yeah.
I'm gonna, my
Yes.
neighborhood, the neighborhood that I'm living in is like it is funky. It is like
Uh-huh.
it's not that funky town. It is like
Yeah.
scary, right? Like
I can relate. Yes.
so it's like and just because I had a great meditation in the morning doesn't mean I don't do my contemplation at the end of the evening.
Yeah. That's
It's
right.
not like, oh, I had a great meditation yesterday. I don't need to do it today.
That's right. Well, it'd be like brushing our teeth one day.
Right,
Don't brush your teeth
right.
another day. It's the same kind of thing. I think that we're beginning, the world is accepting more and more that the spiritual aspect to us is is a part that we disown, but that it's becoming more normalized for that to be a part of our development.
Mhm.
And the psycho spiritual education, you can't just have spiritual development without understanding your psychology and why you came in on this live stream and all the things that your particular live stream all of its traumas have to teach you for your purpose and your mission. We have not had those together. And I'm so excited to see, even being in these residential treatment facilities, to deal
Yes.
with people as a whole being and
Mm-hmm.
to see the gifting inside of them and to help them ignite that flame inside of them rather than them being an addiction that needs to be beat. What a difference.
I love that. Can you, before we close,
Yes.
can you say a little more about fanning the flame? Because that's I love that.
Yeah.
That's where I go. Let's fan the flame. Let's not bang the drum.
Absolutely.
Let's
Yeah.
fan the flame.
Yeah. Well, what I would say for that is we know that every thing that we face, every challenge that we face has a spiritual solution,
Mm-hmm.
first and foremost. Spirituality is not the only aspect of our lives, but it certainly is the most important because everything stems from there. And that would mean, like, what are you believing? What are you thinking about? Where is that coming from? When we get, like you just said, when we don't have a practice, it's really hard to connect to that part of ourselves that has all the guidance, that
Yeah.
will whisper softly in the direction that we need to go to help us fan the flame. And I think fanning the flame, going back to just incorporate where boundaries are, your flame will grow more and more by what lights you up in your life, right? And when you are finding those things that light you up and have the courage to create boundaries around the things that are pulling you down, I
Mm-hmm.
think that flame has a space. It's like a holy, sacred fire inside of us that can burn and burn and burn, and it will get brighter. And sometimes we'll have to rekindle it. We'll have to get some more wood and go back down into a deep dive, deeper maybe than normal. But those practices that, whether it's singing, learn to
Mm-hmm.
use your voice and express and connect to the divine in your own way. Dance, move your body, move, allow spirit to move. But there's so many gifts that we've been given to fan that flame, connect with each other. There's so many ways, but it's the most important thing. Every single day, that should, I think, be the most. I don't want to should on anybody, but in my own experience, I, like you, if I don't take that time, my
Mm-hmm.
day goes a much different direction, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
have the perspective to deal with the things maybe that are less desirable than I would like them to be.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Heather. I really
Great joy.
appreciate.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Really. Thank you for being here. And how can people contact you? How can they reach you so that they could work with you?
Totally. Well, the best way is just to go to thepowersoflove.com, and you'll learn about both my beloved Jason and I there and the work that we do. Or you can also reach me at heatherpowersmusic.com. And that's kind of the zone that when I do personal coaching, a lot of times I incorporate this vocal resonance because I find,
Mm,
especially for a lot of women, really understanding where those developmental traumas lie, it usually 90% of the time is blocked here. And
mm,
so learning to develop a really safe, loving relationship with your voice um, is so empowering. And it has an
yeah,
impact on every other aspect, not only what you say, but also opens up your ears to hear spirit in a much clearer way when you have a good relationship with your voice. So,
I love that. Beautiful. Well,
yeah,
thank you so much. I will make sure that everyone has all of your contact information on the show notes. So,
thank you.
yes, it's been so good, so great to be with you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Just
And
bless you for all that you do.
oh,
Truly, you're
thank,
amazing.
thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Well, back at you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are soul powered, so we have this opportunity to
Yes.
do that. So thank you.
Mhm.
And don't leave. But I'm going to just I'm going to just close out with everybody.
All right.
Okay. Thank you again. So, everyone, I'm so happy that you were with us this day. And I invite you to share this with your friends. Let them hear the wisdom, the pearls that were strung before you on this day. And as you return back into the activities of your day, I invite you to remember these three things. You are powerful beyond measure, loved beyond description, and a force for good in the world. So as you move about the world, spread your magic. And if you need support in a more contained way, I'll leave my information to reach me will be there. And you are absolutely here on purpose with a mighty purpose written on your soul. So go forth and spread your magic. Peace and many blessings to you.